Good evening, everyone. It is good to be here and good to see everybody. I know we've got several of you logged online already, and so looking forward to having another good class tonight. As always, appreciate your contributions, your comments, your thoughts, even your pushback. Glad to wrestle through this stuff with you. We have been doing a study of prayer, and we're continuing in that this evening. Enjoying the angle. As I was putting stuff together today, came across several things that I thought were beneficial. And so looking forward to having this conversation with you. A little bit of a different angle on prayer. But yeah, I got a lot of people chiming in over here. Good to see you too, Lucille. And Easter is here. Merced is here. Carol Stites is here. Yeah, it's good to see everybody. I got you there, Carol. Yeah. Good. Well, okay, yeah, I've got several more of you logged on just since I checked a second ago. Great. Well, hey, I'm going to move on over to my slides screen. And as always, just invite your feedback, thoughts, and comments. We are doing a study of prayer. I'm calling the study Anytime, Any Place. That's a good thing about the nature of God, is that God is always available to us. And really, through the Spirit, that God lives within us. And so he is ever present. And part of how God is present is through us and what we do for other people. All right. So let's see. Yeah, got a good number here already this evening. So let me go ahead and get moving here with the slides. We're here most Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. In fact, intention is to be here every Wednesday night. Had a couple hiccups in the last month. But my title for tonight is Faithful in Prayer. I was trying to think of what to call this, because what I'm wanting to talk about really is prayer as covenant. I'm just curious if you could summarize in a word or just a few words what you think of when you think of covenant. What does covenant mean to you? If you were to talk about prayer as a form of covenant, what would you think of? I'm just curious, like what do you assume I'm going to talk about this evening based on that lesson title? Faithful in prayer, prayer as covenant. So what I'm looking at tonight is not so much a specific way to go about praying as I am talking about the importance of having a committedness, a sense of commitment to praying. And it's really by staying dedicated to the important things over time that God is able to shape us into the people that he wants us to become. The more that we make ourselves available to God, the more that we reflect on all the things he calls us to, this is how God is able to be at work in us. Oh, here we go. This is good. Thank you, Cheryl. Covenant is like a contract, an agreement between two parties with rights and responsibilities on each side. And you know, Cheryl, the most amazing thing to me about when we talk about covenants in the context of our faith, like, why in the world would God enter covenants with us? God doesn't owe us anything, even if we wanted to hold God accountable for something in a covenant. How are you going to make God do anything, right? There's simply no comparison between us and God, and yet it's God who comes along so many times, especially we see it happening through the Old Testament, and then again through Jesus, that God enters into these various kind of interlocking covenants with human beings. And it just, on the face of it, doesn't make any sense, right? Like, God doesn't owe us anything. We couldn't, God might be keeping part of the covenant after I'm dead. Like, I don't have any ability to hold him to it in my lifetime. There you go. Personal contract with spirit. That's a good, I like that, Carol. That's a good definition. So not just a contract, but something that's really got some oomph to it with spirit. So yeah, we acknowledge that we're not just agreeing to something, but that there is someone holding us to a higher level of accountability when we talk about covenant. Just curious. I feel like talking about covenant, faithfulness in prayer, what I'm really talking about in a way is commitment, isn't it? Why is it that you think people have such a hard time with commitment? I mean, isn't it the case that a lot of people struggle with it? What do you think? What do you think is a reason why people struggle so much with commitment? Do you think it's that people just simply like to have unlimited options? I think we kind of assume that about ourselves, yet at the same time, um, I've gotten to where I kind of like going to, like the CVS or the Walgreens when I can, as opposed to a larger grocery store. Or um, there's a chain of grocery stores. I know they have them in Tennessee called Aldi's, which kind of specializes in having pretty good items for especially low costs. And they have several creative ways of kind of cutting back on the need for a lot of employees, which helps them drive their prices down. But when you go there, they'll have baked beans, but you got like one option, and you'll have like American cheese, but it'll be one kind of American cheese. And for us, we're so used to having just so many options, and part of us wants to keep that open, but a lot of people struggle with what they are calling decision fatigue. I don't know if y'all feel that. I feel that all the time, where I'm just like, I don't even really want to have different options. I just want you to give me your top two and let me pick between those two. I don't want to have to sort through a whole aisle just of pinto beans or something. Um, Yeah, there you go. This is interesting. Talking back about covenant, God owes us something the same way that parents owe something to their children. Our parents brought us into this world, and they must provide for us. Well, they ought to, right, Randall? They ought to. If you're going to, I think, especially if God is going to hold us accountable for what we do, I think, sure, yeah, God really ought to guide us in the way that He wants us to live. It wouldn't be it'd be hard to describe God as love if God wound up the world, turned us loose, and gave us no guidance, yet intended to judge us for what we did. Yeah, it takes energy to stay on track. It's a little overwhelming. Yeah, commitment can be a hard thing, but just the same, over time, it's our commitments that really define us, right? I mean, I like to think about what is a person's predictable behaviors. Like if you wanted to talk about someone, if you're wanting to talk about what their commitments are, what are the kinds of things, like the people who know you best, what are the kinds of behaviors they would predict that you're up to? If someone said, hey, I'm looking for this person, and they needed to go searching for you, where might they assume they would find you? Um, I think there's some relationship between that with commitment. What are the kinds of things that you're up to? Because, like it or not, I mean, the truth is we all prioritize based on what really matters to us. Isn't it amazing that even overworked, overcommitted people still manage to find time to do some of the things that they want to do? It's something to think about. Yeah, this is a good angle on it, Sandy. That people have a hard time with commitment because they feel it infringes on their freedom. So it's kind of worth thinking about what freedom really is and what really makes freedom beneficial. Because the way we tend to talk about freedom is purely nobody has anything to say about what I do in any way. And even when we talk about being free in Christ, the angle we're tempted to take is just to say, yeah, now that I don't have the sin problem anymore, I just get to live for me. And really, that's not what Christian freedom is all about. It's a freedom for something, right? We've been freed from all the problems. We're freed from having to prove ourselves so that we would go out and serve joyfully, sincerely, because we're not having to do it out of kind of negative or exhausting reasons. We can do it from a place of joy. Yeah, so we're gonna come back to that idea. That's a good thought, Sandy. Thank you for that. All right, so here's one passage that I think bears on this: Matthew 5:36-37. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. We want to keep things simple. We don't want to overcommit what we're able to deliver, which is part of what he's talking about here, that people who are anxious to make too many oaths and too many promises and all this kind of thing, you end up having to eat your words, right? If you overextend yourselves in terms of what you promise and what you can actually deliver. But trying to be a simple person who is committed to the right things, who is unambiguous about what's driving me, what I'm trying to do, who I'm doing it for. These are all things that are helpful. But just in general, if my habit is not to tell the truth, that's why I suddenly need to start making promises, right? having a need to swear something implies that the rest of the time there's a fair chance I'm not telling the truth. A person who lives honestly, I don't approach this passage so much as like I've heard it said, like for Christians, we ought not to ever swear in court, for example, like people will affirm rather than swear. I get where that's coming from. I don't know that the point of this is necessarily to make the no swearing rule. I think my opinion is that it's more the principle of if you live a life so consistent with your values and consistent in behavior, why would you need to swear? What would be the point of it if you always tell the truth? Why would I have to swear I'm telling the truth this time? Not that I couldn't do it, but I shouldn't have to need to. If you know me well, it should be the case that what I tell you is what I mean, and what I say is the truth. Yeah, do not, Sandy, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of times when people swear, like you'll hear people invoke terms like "I swear to God" or "I swear by Thor's hammer" or whatever they might do to kind of emphasize something. So the idea is like there's some sort of there's something that's going to revisit me if I break this. When God entered into that covenant with Abraham, and you remember they had the animals that were cut in half, and except the two birds on either side of the path, and the presence of God goes through the middle of the animals. There's the implication that God is Himself saying, if I go back on my covenant with you and don't honor it, then may the same thing that happened to these animals now happen to me. So that's a visual example. So I think the idea of swearing by your head is just kind of, wishing something bad to come down on you if you didn't uphold your part of the bargain. So if you're going to swear, what's the collateral, right? Like what's the thing binding you to what you're swearing? What will your loss be if you don't follow through on this thing that you've now promised? Like there's got to be something attached or it's meaningless, is kind of the assumption, I think. But I think this has something to do with what we're talking about with covenant and committedness, that we don't want to enter into covenants lightly or easily, but when we do, we positively should see the value in honoring them. I think this passage is another good one for highlighting some of what we're talking about. Psalm 57 that says, "They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music." I could just pull that one phrase out of these verses, really, because that's what I think we're going for. In prayer, what I'm hoping to cultivate or let God cultivate within me is a steadfast heart, that I know what it is that I care about most. I have sorted that out. I have sorted out myself and tried to align my priorities with what I claim to care about, and my heart is steadfast. So even though people might try to trip me up or criticize me or surprise me, I'm able to respond to those things with maturity because I've already got a heart that is solidly in the place that I'm choosing to put it. So I think the image of a steadfast heart is a good image for some of what we're kind of talking about this evening. So just in general, getting back to your point, Sandy, boundaries. I've come to appreciate that I think boundaries really do help us to flourish. And even in like, I don't know, like artistic ways, for example. Um, One of the problems to me is like, I have a harder time sitting down with a completely blank sheet of paper and trying to create something from nothing. But if you set me down and say, okay, you got to create something that accomplishes this, and here's all the things you're not allowed to do, suddenly you got to find ways to work within that space. And that to me is kind of engaging and fun. There's some famous stories about some of our space shuttles getting into problems where what they'll do is these guys will get in a room together, guys and gals will get in a room together, and they'll put out there on a table everything that the astronauts have available to them on the spacecraft, because you can't send anything else up, right? It's just a matter of what we've got, and they're forced to be creative. But a lot of times they've come up with some really, really inventive and amazing things that they can do to solve problems. Of course, now you got these 3D printers that are incredible. Yeah, this is exactly right, Kathy. I was thinking about mentioning that. Yeah, if you've ever looked at my website, I have periodically shared these, but I've got several different collections of haikus. Haikus are Japanese poems that are usually fairly short and profound. And what I like about them is it is 5 syllables, then 7 syllables, then 5 syllables. That's all you've got to work with. And one of the reasons I like haikus is that I think in preaching, I don't know. I mean, I try to take a fairly conversational tone, but at the same time, um, I don't think it helps anyone for me to waste a lot of verbiage, if that makes sense. I don't think y'all want me to get up and spend 10 minutes rambling about what the weather's like before I say anything. So I think that word economy is useful and precision. You know, what am I trying to say and how do I say it well? These are some of the things I like about trying to write haikus. And so when we did our Wednesday night class through the minor prophets, as I went through the minor prophets, I wrote a series of haikus based on what I saw as kind of big themes in the minor prophets. I also wrote haikus on Isaiah, and I've done some haikus on like First John, and actually some on the Gospel of John, but I don't think I've put those out there yet. But yeah, I really thrive with limits placed on what I should do. But a lot of times, if you're having trouble brainstorming, that's one of the most useful ways to start a more productive brainstorming session where you just say, hey, here's the limits. It can't be this, it can't be this, it can't be this. So you use the nose to make the wall and then work within those boundaries. And a lot of times you'll surprise yourself what you can come up with. But looking at the garden above my shoulder, um, the way that, you know, of course, those are all pretty plants, but there's a lot of plants that if it was growing in the middle of your yard, you'd call it a weed. But because it's growing in the right spot within the boundaries set aside for it and the kind of dirt intended for it, with those parameters and boundaries, it's a thing of beauty. It's an enhancement to the yard. But just in general, I think a good principle for us is that where we want to believe, as you pointed out, Sandy, we want to believe that I just want total freedom and no limits of any kind, but we really do flourish within having set limits for ourselves. I was, let's see, important to set boundaries when you're raising children. Boundaries help them to flourish. There's an interesting piece of research on this with children on playgrounds. You know, a lot of times people just start pushing a theory before they examine whether the theory is actually any good for children. The one that's really damaging our children right now is this false belief that whatever doesn't kill you makes you weaker, and don't ever make anyone do anything that makes them uncomfortable. And if something's hard for them to hear, you got to use trigger warnings and never say it. Like, I get that we're trying to be sensitive to people and that a lot of times we can be insensitive, but some of this is really not helpful. But these are not the bots, other droids you were looking for. Um, if you like it, it is a wild. If you like it, it is a wildflower. If you don't like it, it is a weed. That's exactly right, Brenda. Yeah, all depends on whether it's in a place that you want it or not. But yeah, sorry, I got off track. I don't even remember the point I was about to make there a minute ago. But yeah, haikus are certainly one way of trying to flourish within boundaries. So yeah, I think that we kind of assume that we want total freedom, but one of the best things that can happen to us is limits. Oh, what I was going to say is I was talking to someone a few days ago about having gone to a private Christian university. I went to Harding University, and how it's not that I was a totally undisciplined person. I mean, I graduated no problem, but I was definitely burned out from high school and struggling a lot with motivation in college. And at the time, Harding had I think it was 11 p.m. or 11:15 p.m. curfew, meaning that everybody had to be back in the dorms by 11 p.m. And everyone talks about that like it's just so terrible. But the truth is, if they'd made the curfew 1 a.m., which I think it now is, I would have always stayed out every night till 1 a.m. and I wouldn't have started my homework until then. And in a lot of ways, I'm grateful that I had that limit placed on me, because at least that way I was starting my homework closer to midnight as opposed to later than midnight. So some of those boundaries I think are better for us than we want to give them credit for. Here's another way that I want us to think about what freedom is. I don't know if you guys watched the Olympic opening ceremony a few months ago. But overall, I was kind of enjoying it, right? Like it's always amazing and artistic and all this. And then they bring out this lady piano player. I know her first name is Hiromi. I can't pronounce her last name, Uehara or something. But if you go to YouTube and look up Hiromi after class, stay with me for now. But look up Hiromi. Um, it was like my I think my mouth was hanging open. She is an absolute virtuoso on the piano. She's a jazz musician and she goes at just a blazing speed. And it's not just that amazed me. It's that while she's doing this mind-bending stuff musically, she's looking around at the crowd, making faces like the one in this picture. She's super charismatic and fun and into it. And just watching her, if you didn't see her hands going on the keyboard, you would think she could just be a person in the crowd getting into what she's listening to. But like, she's just got this incredible connection to what she's doing musically. And that's how you can really tell a true master, is that they're playing stuff that has to be hard, but you can't tell from looking at them that they're struggling with it at all. It's an effortless thing. And so what I think about as I reflect on her, here's someone who has the freedom to play the piano any way that she wants to, right? Like easily one of the best in the world. And I'm sure there's lots of super talented ones, but I mean, you just got to look her up. I bought one of her albums and I've been listening to her a lot at the office while I study and stuff. Just good to have playing in the background. She's got a jazz trio she plays with. And, but what it is that produces the freedom she has as a piano player is that she really made a commitment and had the discipline to practice. And she learned all the fundamentals and she learned all her scales and she practiced her scales and she learned all the different modal stuff. Like there's all kinds of things you learn with music theory, but it's like she had the discipline to keep ingesting and digesting and practicing and practicing. Who knows how many thousands of hours she's put into that instrument. But as a result of a commitment to something and discipline at something, that's what real freedom is. You could say, yeah, I've got the freedom to play anything I want on the piano, but I can't do it. Like I can't do it. But she, on the other hand, because of the commitment, because of the discipline, is free to do this really cool stuff, at will. And so much of it, I believe, is improvised. Like she's just making up this stuff as she goes, at this mind-bending speed. And I think that's one of the real benefits of what we're talking about in prayer, that I want to be a person who is free to be an excellent example of a Christ-like life. I want to be a person who can do it in such a way that it seems effortless when you watch me, in the sense of my instincts are so shaped to look like Jesus that it's just what flows. And that's what I'm getting at with this. What is real freedom? Freedom is not just having no limits placed on you, no obligations placed on you, and just a matter of me walking around insisting on my rights all the time. Real freedom comes from committing yourself to something, persisting in something to where over time you become capable of things you wouldn't have been capable of otherwise. And I do believe the same principle that works for excellent musicianship also works for our integrity in our walk with God. That I tell you, some of the older members I've worked with at several churches, you meet some of these older people, often widowed, and I've pointed this out to you guys before. Like I know some people where I would really say the only way to become a person like that has to be that this person has spent 70 years faithfully walking with God, praying regularly, returning to scripture regularly, and it's just become who they are, right? Like they don't even have to think about who they are. They just make these great choices and they have these wonderful actions because it's just what flows out of them. So boundaries help one focus. It's also good to be in situations where there are no boundaries to widen one's perspective and experience. Yeah, that's right, Easter. And it kind of depends on what we're talking about, right? So I think the context I'm trying to use these comments tonight for is more of a person who's resistant to having any kind of expectation placed on them in terms of their dedication to God. But you're right that sometimes rules can feel can feel limiting and harsh. If we feel micromanaged, it can feel stifling. Yeah, there's definitely situations where fewer boundaries are better. I think I'm just in a creative process. For me, I kind of like it when I know, I don't have an infinite canvas. I've got a sheet of paper and I've got to work within this and some things on it. But that's a fair point. It can help us to be in more open situations as well, especially when we want to kind of blend disciplines. And a lot of good creativity comes from blending one area with a different area. Practice makes perfect. Yeah, it certainly leads us toward greater perfection, greater maturity. We strive for the day we no longer have to strive. One of the people I'm thinking about, Kathy, the drummer for the band Rush, who is now deceased, Neil Peart. Many for a long time have considered him to be, if not the best, certainly one of the best drummers in rock music. And people always called him the professor because he was just so intelligent and so gifted. But I was watching an interview with him one time, and he said, "What is a master if not a master student?" And one of the things people talked about him is that over the years, it was very late in his career that he completely changed up his grip and his philosophy about how he played the drums. Like, he had been this guy that, it was already the case that nobody could keep up with him. And then he went and studied under this really innovative jazz drummer. He changed his grip. He changed several things about how he thought about playing the drums. And that was his point. He's like, I just want to keep getting better. So yeah, we're striving for the day we no longer have to strive, but there's also kind of a joy in continual striving to get even better, right? Like continuing to push ourselves. You don't want to do that from a place of anxiety, but at least in terms of our Christian growth, I think it's the case we can look back and say, I have grown, I have matured. I'm not the person I once was, but I think God's still also leading me to be a different person than I am now. Yeah, free to approach the throne anytime and in any situation. That's right. That's right. Thank you, Easterbell. Okay, so there's an example, and again, Hiromi, look her up on YouTube after class. But she is phenomenal. I thought this was a good quote from John Wesley. He says, "What we need is a desire to know the whole will of God with a fixed resolution to do it." That ought to be something that drives us as we pray, that God has a will. I want to know all aspects of his will, what he wants the world to be like, what he wants me to do, how he wants me to interact with people, what he wants his church to be like. And I should care what that is. And then I should be absolutely fixed. We'll use that word steadfast again in trying to bring about God's will so that we'll be on earth as it is in heaven. Came across, it wasn't exactly this quote, so I modified it a bit. But someone was talking about the word duty, which again, if we're talking about a word like freedom, we'd have an aversion to tacking the word duty onto the word freedom. But we do have a sacred duty responsibility to God. I thought this was an interesting way to consider it, that duty is living out the sacredness of the present moment. That if I'm trying to be a person who is doing the duties that I should, the tasks that I ought to, following through and honoring God as God would want me to, what that means is that I'm always recognizing that this moment right now is sacred. So, for example, of all the ways you could be spending your evening, there's several of you. We've got a good crowd logged on tonight. I don't know exactly how many. Looks like 17 of you on Facebook, about 6 of you on YouTube. More of you will watch this later, but of all the ways you could be spending your time right now, you're choosing to participate in a online discussion where we're trying to talk about prayer and greater devotion to God. I think in some sense we're trying to live out the sacredness of this moment right now. But duty just means that I'm stepping up because I recognize that in this time and in this place, God could be doing something, and I want to be honoring whatever part of that I'm supposed to have. But I thought that was an interesting idea to consider, that duty is living out the sacredness of the present moment. It is the case that I can't serve God apart from God's help. This is part of why we want to pray often, that God is at work within us through his Spirit to will and to act according to his good purposes. So I can't serve God apart from God's help, which sounds like kind of a downer, but the good news is that God is helping, that God has not abandoned us, that he's not ignoring us, that he listens to us, that he responds to us. For whatever it is we're going through, God is helping. For the things we're trying to do for God's sake, God is helping us. So that's to me an encouraging thought. And again, part of why, if I start thinking about prayer as a form of honoring a covenant, I need God's help to honor God. I mean, I really can't do it on my own. I think that's something to understand. So here's one question for you. What commitments do you have to God in your life? You're welcome to comment if you want to. You don't have to, but I think this is worth pondering. Where it's easy to have. It's actually not easy to have any habits in place, right? That's been for us one of the challenging lessons of COVID. I can tell you on staff, we were so desperate to be able to restart in-person worship services, Bible class options. Like we desperately longed to be able to do the stuff we trained to do and want to do and frankly are brought here to do. But you know, it's been hard in that people have had such a long season of quarantine that what I think we had kind of hoped would feel more like opening the floodgates. The truth is that in many cases, new habits have set in. When I was at a conference about a month ago, I was visiting with the minister friends from around the country, and I think across the board. And I know this is also true in different denominations, that church attendance, just in general, is down a sizable percentage everywhere. It's been hard to get a handle on, like, how many people do we still have involved? How many people are we really working with at this point? A lot of those kinds of things have gotten blurry. So I'll say that to honor any commitments in your life to God is praiseworthy and a good thing. But there are the ones that, as a Christian, of course, as a minister, this is different. But for anybody who's a committed Christian, I'd like it to be the case that people would expect me to take part in the life of the church and to raise my hand and volunteer somewhere and find ways to be a member who's contributing to what's going on. I think that would be, if nothing else, at least a basic set of expectations and assumptions. But what other things do you have? I mean, do you have anything you do for God apart from what people see you do for God? Is your religious faith just something that plays out for you in a sphere where other people are present? Or are there things you're doing that are unseen? Jesus talks about the value of praying in the closet where people don't see that you're praying. But what are the commitments that you have to God in your life? Sure, you got baptized. You said, I want to live for Jesus. I believe these things are true about him. I'm committing to live for him. So for you, what is that looking like? And it's not just, it certainly includes things like regular time spent in prayer, reflection on scripture, that kind of stuff. But there are other kinds of actions that you can also do for the sake of God. What about people in your life that need someone to check in on them? People who are shut in, people who are sick or in the hospital, people who've gone through struggles. Like, what are some other things that you could be doing? I'm really inviting you to kind of think about that introspectively. Have a commitment to use my talents in the best way I know how to serve God. And I think that phrase there, in the best way I know how, is an important phrase, Cheryl, because we face this, don't we? Like, there are plenty of times where I intend to do something good and it doesn't go over the way that I hoped it would, or I may have misread a situation, or it's not the case that I'll always knock it out of the park in terms of how well I can read a situation. But God is definitely still honored that I tried to do a good thing. And whether people love it or reject it, whatever it is we're offering, I know God is honored when you try to do that. The best way I know how, to the extent that I have knowledge and understanding, I try to honor God with that. Consider marriage. This is good. Not only a commitment to my partner, but a commitment to God. Thanks for bringing that in there, Maggie. That's an important thing to think about, isn't it? That in turning to God, in connecting with another human being, that if we talk about covenants, marriage is one of the very few covenants that we really bring up and discuss in church life. That we want to honor our marriages, that we want to invest in our marriages and relationships, and this is very important, and it is something that we commit to God. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Trying to study His Word every day, whether it be an online Bible study or revisiting something that's come up in one of our classes or during Sunday service. Yeah, Kathy, and I'm glad. I know you're a person who seems to connect to God at least somewhat through time spent in study, and I'm that way as well. That I enjoy when I have a good resource or something that helps me see something in a new light or through a deeper lens that I wouldn't have had on my own had I not been studying. So yeah, that feels good. So yeah, studying is a good commitment. Sometimes in graduate school we talk about the ministry of study. That one of the ways that some of us honor God is by being especially committed to kind of doing the grunt work of sorting through a lot of material so that we can share with others things that we find. Through our Prayer Warriors group, I've been committed to praying for others in need. Sandy, I hope that y'all have some opportunity also as you do that to keep some record of ways that God is answering those prayers. Maybe not always exactly in the way you asked, but if you have a whole group of people who are praying for something, I really do trust that God is at work in our individual prayers and in our collective prayers. And I bet if you're committed to looking, I'm sure that you'll see God do things. Um, yeah, very good. I actually looked up every version of the Ephesians 2:10 memory verse after we read it on Sunday. I wish I had known that, Kathy, because I printed off every version of that verse when I was prepping for these. So if you want copies of all the others, I've actually got them all sitting beside me. So yeah, I've got about 2 pages with each of the verses from, I think it was at least 27 translations that I compared. But that was also like, I really didn't even look at them till I'd made a stab at my own translation. And so you can kind of look through and see. And there's consistent trends in what a lot of them do. But yeah, there's a good example of, kind of wanting to go deeper and look at every angle. Um, yeah. I did for sure look up a lot of those. Expressing gratitude for blessings and answered prayers for His steadfast love and forgiveness. Brenda, it's interesting how a lot of times scientific fields end up reaffirming what Christianity would have already taught us to do anyway. And gratitude, the field of positive psychology, is holding up gratitude. If you're trying to get yourself in a better place mentally, relationally, it's like gratitude has tentacles that touch everything. And talking about regular practices of, if nothing else, daily making an intentional list of things you appreciate from that day, or even if you had to write something that was a negative thing from the day, finding a way to be thankful for some aspect of it. But gratitude is one of the keys to unlocking a mindset of optimism. And as Christians, I really think it's the case, not that we have to only ever be happy, but when you're an optimist, you can be resilient. You can look at your problems and say, hey, this is hard, but it's temporary, right? Our light, how does the passage go? These are light and momentary problems in comparison to the eternal glory that's being revealed. Like the things that God's going to be giving us makes all the other stuff we're dealing with light and temporary, even though I know a lot of the time our problems certainly do not feel light or temporary, at least when they're going to have consequences to the end of our own life. But gratitude for blessings and answered prayers for His steadfast love and forgiveness. That's really good, and I bet it's good for you, Brenda. I bet you could talk about some ways that has helped you as a person. I think I've referenced some in this class on prayer. I think I've already referenced some about breath prayers. I may not have, but a breath prayer is where you find an idea that you want to sit with for a while. And like as you breathe in, you say the first part of a Bible verse. As you breathe out, you say the second part of a Bible verse. And you just kind of keep repeating it so that the idea can just kind of wash around in there and be at work in forming you. One of my favorite prayers, I guess it was a couple of years ago. I was having something that was particularly challenging for me, and I was off on one of my personal retreats, and there was something I was just really having a nasty time with it, and I started using the word thank you as a breath prayer. And so I would breathe in and think about God being present. And when you're really distracted, like you're trying to focus on God and all these random ideas just keep popping in your head and distracting you. And so I started dismissing every one of those ideas with the word thank you. So if it was a good thing that popped in, I would thank God for the good thing. If it was a negative thing that popped in, as I was breathing out, I would force myself to think of some reason I should be thankful that that happened the way that it happened. Like there's got to be some part of this that I can have a positive takeaway with God's help. So all about that gratitude. Gratitude's a really good thing for us to practice as Christians. Like this verse too, thinking about commitment. Romans 12:12 says, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, constant in prayer." I think that's where gratitude lands, isn't it? Being joyful in hope. I have hope. I'm happy because of my hope. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be constant. Those are good description words for a Christian. Even in affliction, I'll be patient. I'll endure it. And in prayer, I will be constant. I won't neglect it. So reflecting about prayer as covenant, there is for this at least partially a covenant of time, that prayer ought to be regular. One of the standards we would see in the Old Testament would be the prophet Daniel. And you remember they were able to catch Daniel. I referenced this a couple of weeks ago in a sermon, how part of how you catch Daniel is you just go after him for praying, because the one thing you know about Daniel, talking about those predictive patterns, what's the thing Daniel's going to be up to? You know this is a guy who's going to be praying 3 times a day, no matter what. So morning, afternoon, evening, he's always going to be praying. So deciding that there are going to be certain times that are for God and not for anything else, setting a reminder, or maybe doing something to block. There's all kinds of tech you can use these days for blocking internet access at certain time periods and all that. One question would be, if you're trying to honor prayer as a form of covenant with God, what regular time will you set aside to do this? What is the pattern for it? What is the constancy about how you will go about it? That's one thing to be asking. But prayer should be a regular thing, so it's a bit of a covenant of time. Here's an example. Psalm 5:3 says, "In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my requests before you and wait expectantly." That's what he's describing as his daily routine. First thing in the morning, I go ahead and invite God into my day and talk to God about my requests, the things that are weighing on me. And then the rest of the day, I'm looking. I know that God's going to come through, so I ask him for what I need, and then I spend that day looking. And to me, this is a word about faith, because I'm anticipating that God is going to do something. And so I'm just watching to see where it happens. I think that's a useful verse for this. So what's the time that you would say if you were writing this psalm? In the afternoons, Lord, in the afternoons. At nighttime, Lord, at nighttime. This is when I'm going to lay things out, and you're going to find me there. So there's a covenant of time, which has to do with our constancy. There's also a covenant, I would say, of place, which has to do with our stability. We do need to have some places in our life that anchor us. I would certainly consider Christian worship to be one of those spaces that help to anchor our faith, that I'm committed to showing up with, participating with other Christians in a time of worship. We need spaces in our life that we return to regularly in order to meet with God. For me, that has taken the place that has been in the. Trying to think how to say this. The way that has happened for me in my life is that there are certain spaces I've tended to go to for prayer, and whether that is a certain chair in the house, a certain window you like to sit in front of, a place out on your porch. I also have places I like to go, where there are certain places I go, certain trees I'd like to sit under, and I just know when I go to that place, it's what I'm there to do. But having some spaces and some times that you're committed to, at these times I will go to these places and I will meet God there, and I'll have stability, I'll have constancy. I want to be consistent. I want to be faithful. I want to honor this thing I'm intending to do for God. Another way to put this would be just to say that, with God, you need to date God. Just the way that in a relationship you would be making time for each other, that you would invest in the relationship, that you would set aside intentional times where, hey, we're going to get together so we can stay close because it's important to us to be close. Do you schedule time, like blocked off time that nothing else is allowed to crowd, where God is going to be the number one thing with you for that period of time? I think that's important. And good news is you don't have to get a babysitter or anything to do this one. You just need to carve out the space that works in your schedule. But dating God's a good idea. I'd also say there's really a lot of research that's been done on relationships and marriages over the years, and something that has been an encouragement to me is that it's pretty well established that many of the very best relationships would look dreadfully boring to outsiders. So all the stuff in the romantic comedies, like my least favorite scene that I feel like just about every romantic comedy has some sort of version of this scene where it's like the star-crossed lovers are interested in each other, but they're having a conflict and a misunderstanding, and it's threatening to break them apart. And it's like inevitably they're either at a big wedding ceremony or at a ball game, and suddenly one of them just grabs the microphone and the whole place turns and looks at them, and they go on into this big speech about how they really feel, and somehow they get it together in this grand gesture. I got to tell you, if anybody did that at a ball game that I paid a lot to go to, I'd be annoyed by it, right? Like, it's never how the crowd reacts. The crowd's always like rooting for the people. But that's fiction. Like, I think that most of us don't need something that high drama, nor would I really want someone to approach me in that public of a way. But a lot of what's really healthy for relationships is stuff that doesn't look that interesting to the outsiders. It looks like constant efforts at connection. It's the kind of thing where you send each other a text and say, hey, I saw this thing today. It reminded me of you. Here's a little funny thing I came across. My dad used to sometimes cut out little comic strips from his newspaper at work that he thought I would like, and he'd bring them home to me. But like, just looking for little things. Like, if I know that you like something, I'm going to start trying to take that route to connect with you. But small little points of connection that are frequent, where I invite you in to see the thing that I'm laughing at. I talk to you about the thing I'm concerned about. I include you in my decision-making process. I allow you to influence me in the choices that I make. All of that's what a healthy relationship looks like. The relationships that last 40, 50, 60 years, if you were to watch the couple together, it's not usually the case. Not that they never take grand vacations or make big gestures or that stuff. A lot of times that may be the case, but it's really the constant little things that make such a difference. And this is why thinking of prayer as a form of covenant, that it's a commitment to God, that God is honoring his covenant to save me, but I'm going to honor my covenant to treat God as if I love God, and that God is important to me, and that God is my priority. And I'm going to carve out time for God, and I'm going to make sure that that time happens. That's a lot of what makes any relationship healthy. And what's good for your relationship with your spouse is also good for your relationship with God. So how can we be intentional about that? All right. Here's something I'd like to be able to say fairly often. I saw that, God, and I know that was you. Thinking about what the psalmist says, I get up in the morning and I tell you what I'm concerned about. And during the day, I see that you're watching me and you're slipping me the little connections, what I was just talking about, right? That God does that for us too, that God gives us those little connection points. God, I saw that. I noticed that. And I know that was from you. Every good thing comes from above, right? Every good thing is a gift from God. So being aware of God, giving God credit for the good things. Here's a question just for you to ponder. If you view your devotional life as a covenant or commitment, what should it look like? My hesitancy in using those words is that I think there may be like a pejorative sense attached to them. But I hope in the senses that we've talked about them in this class tonight, you can see I don't think those have to be negative ideas, but committedness, persistence. What this leads me to is the freedom to be a better person than I would have been if I just kind of do whatever I feel like when I feel like it. So choosing to be God's person, committing to being God's person, showing up and honoring those commitments even when I don't feel like it or it's decidedly inconvenient. Persisting in those things over time has this formative effect and helps me to be able to do the stuff I couldn't have done otherwise, I think. All right. Well, appreciate everyone's participation. Yeah, to me, I found that when reality set in, God was already there waiting for me. That's right. God is always a bit ahead of us, right? That to me is the big image in the book of Acts. I know several years ago I preached for you guys a series on the book of Acts, but rather than do a verse by verse study, I approached Acts mostly in terms of the Holy Spirit. So we looked at all the passages involving direct mentions of the Holy Spirit. And that's kind of what happens in the book of Acts, is that the Spirit is always doing something new, and the church is just trying to keep up with it. And God, sometimes we perceive, we're going to look at this verse this week, 2 Peter 3:9. Sometimes we perceive God as being slow, but in fact, a lot of times God is just so far ahead of us. We think we're waiting on him when in fact he's waiting for us, right? Anyway, yeah, if you have anything in this course you want to share with someone, you're welcome to hit that share button. Encourage people to follow our page, like our page, find us on YouTube. Always happy to have people interacting with us, and we're here on Wednesday nights. We have a lot of streaming content going right now. Regular Sunday worship at 9:30, Bible classes at 10:45. We run those as two separate streams, but they're always there, always available. And then our Sunday Zoom class has been happening at 4 p.m. that Kevin's been teaching. Been doing some really interesting stuff with that class. And he did one the other day that I think was largely based on some of the research he did, some original research relative to his PhD dissertation, which if you don't know this, like Kevin has a world-class education. I mean, he really got groomed by some of the best of the best. Like the guys who publish the books everyone else buys, like those are the guys who signed his dissertation. So he's got some good stuff to share. Wednesday nights we're here at 7. I'm glad to have you with us, and we'll be back again, Lord willing, next week. And looks like I'm to the end of my slides, so you can see my beautiful computer background. So anyway, this has been good. You guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, and Lord willing, we will see you on